Ready?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest installation of the Oregon Coast Art Talk series. It's October 4th, 2020, and it's a beautiful fall day on the Oregon coast. My name is Tom Webb. I'm the director of the Newport Visual Arts Center for the Oregon Coast Council for the Arts. This 13-week series of artist talks and panel discussions and studio tours is being presented by OCCA in conjunction with the Oregon Coast Online Art Show. We are excited today to have Henk Pander in an artist discussion entitled A Tale of Two Paintings. And Henk, super excited to have you. Henk is one of our region's most important painters. His work is in many collections, including those of the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, the Museum Henrietta Polak in the Netherlands, City of Amsterdam, City of Newport, City of Portland, excuse me, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Portland Art Museum, Frye Museum, Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art, Hallie Ford Museum, among many others in his over 50-year career as a distinguished painter. So Henk, welcome, and give us a little bit of an update on your recent travels and your recent exhibit.
Well, I just came back on Friday from a painting trip with my son Jakob to go to the Malheur Wildlife Refuge in Southern Oregon and painting a landscape out there, making large watercolors. I've been doing that for many years. I started out working so-called plein air, but working outside as a young child with my dad when I was like 9 years old. And I've been doing that my whole life, just working in the landscape and making watercolors. And no matter if I work on stage sets or murals or large oil paintings, the experience of going outside in the landscape and just making paintings right there on the spot is something I've just thoroughly enjoyed doing throughout my life, and actually is my idea of vacation. So
what is it about the what is it about the Eastern Oregon landscape and the Malheur Refuge that's so attractive to you as a painter?
Well, you know, I immigrated here from the Netherlands in the mid-60s. And although I've lived here a long time, but deep in my heart, I'm still this Dutch artist. And I was educated in Holland, and I grew up in these landscapes out there. And so I think in Dutch. I'm a kind of basically a displaced person in a way, you know. So I'm kind of in a sense, sort of an outsider. And the American landscape, of course, is so incredibly different from the landscapes I grew up in and painted in as a young child and a young man, that to me, these places just are incredibly powerful and reflective of really the American experience. And what I find really striking about the United States is its spectacular landscapes, and of course, these dry deserts with these enormous mountains and rim rocks and this sort of history of the American Indian and all of this kind of incredible places are so unlike the Netherlands that they're just really, to me, kind of archetypal for the United States. And also the dryness of it, the emptiness of it, the kind of starkness of it, the fact that even the smallest thing would stand out in it, the sense of climate change, the cruelty of that landscape and all that together, and the timelessness of it. We were like in burns, or like whole sections of mountains and hills had been burned off, and so all the vegetation had been gone. It'd be kind of this scorched earth landscape with this huge black stones in it and stuff. It looked like Anselm Kiefer. It was just powerful landscapes with this sort of really deep-reaching symbolic meaning, and I just really am drawn to these kind of places.
And you also have a current exhibit in the Netherlands at the Haarlem Historic Museum. Are any of these dramatic American landscapes part of that? Part of that exhibit? And can you talk a little bit more about your current exhibit?
Well, the exhibit in Haarlem is such. It has a little bit of a story to it in order to get to Haarlem. I've always been sort of interested in being an immigrant, and sort of the idea of like, here I'm in this country. I came here more because I was married to an American woman and it sort of ended up here, but I never really had this idea, I want to become an American or live here, but I ended up here. And so I thought, what am I supposed to do in this place? I can't just make any more pictures like I used to do in the Netherlands. So I started, say, well, I'm going to see if I can paint at least my impression, what it is like for me to be here. And I came here in the middle of the Vietnamese War. There were huge demonstrations. There were like, I taught at the art school. Students were yanked out of class to get into the American Army. It was just an incredibly powerful experience culturally, but at the same time, since I was a young child during the Second World War, it brought back these echoes being in a warfaring place. And so I started quite early doing sort of works dealing with like war and battlefields and such, like sort of in a kind of a Goyesque manner in a sense, and started making this ink wash drawing. So in '84, I received a commission to do 2 large murals for Oregon State University for the Memorial Union there. And there were 2 walls, and one of the walls dealt with like the adventure of science, and the other wall dealt with the memory of World War I, because the Memorial Union was a memorial towards the fallen students who had fought during World War I in Eastern France, around Verdun. And so I decided to go to Verdun and see what I could still find in these landscapes. And I found, trenches. I found shot up trees. I found ruined cities. I found forts. I found just vast cemeteries and so. It was just an incredibly powerful experience to see that war completely still imprinted in the French landscapes, including this big, huge sort of early 20th century war memorials where the French still put flowers. It was very, very, very moving. And when I came back, I thought, I wonder if there's other places, whether it's in the United States, where also conflict is imprinted into the American landscape. And so when I came back here, I started looking for areas of conflict. Of course, an obvious one would be the Hanford nuclear reservation, where I started making paintings, and actually recently made a very large painting of the core of the B reactor at Hanford. So as I was doing that, I was thinking, why am I drawn? What is it that I'm so drawn to these kind of subjects which deal with war and conflict? And I realized it was because I'm basically a child of the war. I was a child in occupied Netherlands in a big family, and we had experienced a great deal of suffering during that time. And so I thought, if that is a theme which drives all these other interests, maybe I start sort of looking back at that period in my life. And I got a sketchbook, and in a week time, I filled a whole sketchbook full of drawings of scenes I remembered. Yeah, I remembered our living room. I remembered scenes in the countryside. I remembered my parents. I remembered soldiers. I remembered all kinds of incidents. I remembered hunger. I remember without being food. I remembered my father had to hide, and my mother had to pretend my dad was in Germany. We had to lie to the Germans. And so once I started making these drawings, I thought, God, I've been walking around these memories for like 50 some years. I think, especially since I had seen these big paintings by Anselm Kiefer in Paris, I thought maybe I start kind of a conversation with Kiefer in my work to do large paintings and say, it's not mythology what happened here. It's just this stuff which happened to an innocent family in Haarlem, which were affected by huge forces outside of the home where they could not really even defend themselves to it. But what happens to a family sticking together in a little row house in Harlem? And so I started making this body of paintings about that. And I've been doing so since actually quite recently. I thought that these paintings were sort of like a metaphor about, an American missile dropped on a wedding in Afghanistan. If it happens there, the whole family explodes. So they were kind of like a metaphor towards American warfare. But my paintings like that, they were never here understood as such. They said, oh God, in Holland, oh, that terrible time you had. People never saw the metaphor about how it actually reflected on current experience. However, this year is the 75th years celebration of the liberation of the Netherlands from the Nazis, 75 years. And my work through my brother Peter was brought to the attention of the Harlem Museum. And these paintings I have done here, they're all set in Harlem. They're all set in this little street, this house and stuff. And I tried to be kind of authentic about it. So you could actually recognize where it was, which house, and the neighbors, and all bit. So that museum said, what are all these paintings which are about us and about Harlem and about the war? What are they doing all the way in Portland, Oregon? They should come to the Netherlands. And so they offered me this exhibition, which is up, which opened in March. And the idea is to keep that whole, I send them nearly all my paintings and all the drawings. And the idea is to keep all that work in the Netherlands. So there's really no point of being here in Portland, Oregon any longer because of the lack of interest in it. So therefore, that's what that exhibition is about. It's getting an enormous amount of attention. And so after I had sent the bulk of my body of work there, I was sort of out of these paintings, and I thought I still had ideas and memories of like poignant experiences that I had during the war. And I thought maybe I'll do one more painting, and I do it here. And the story was that at the end of the war, the very end of the war, we were in an extreme famine. There was just no food, and we were little kids. And there was 5 little babies there. And so my father, we come out of a shipper's family, and an old cargo ship had arrived in the river Sparne in Harlem. And they had offered to take me and my sister to the countryside where we could be fed because we were basically literally starving to death. So my dad took us to this ship, and we got in the ship, and the skipper's wife took one look at my sister and me, and we stayed overnight there. My sister cried all night, and she said, I don't want these filthy kids on my ship because they have scurvy and they're covered in lice. Out with these children. And so my father had to come back and took us off this ship, and my dad said, well, I'll never send you away again with strangers. And so that painting you have there is the story of the skipper's wife saying, out with these kids.
Right. So hey, let me just interject a little bit before we go on, because it's a really nice transition to the first painting that we're going to be talking about. And just to let people know, we're going to be focusing on 2 and 3 paintings actually today. And the first, which Henk mentioned, is the skipper's wife. Yeah. And that is in the current Oregon Coast Online Art Show. And then we'll be talking about 2 paintings related to the Federal Building in downtown Portland, Federal Courthouse Building. Justin, can you make sure that we have the picture of the skipper's wife up there so that we can? I
lost my assistant disappeared, so.
Justin can post the image of the skipper's wife for our audience to see, and we're looking at it on our computers as well. So, Henk, let's start talking about the skipper's wife in particular, and if you can kind of weave in a little bit about your perspective on I don't know if this is the right term, but historical kind of narrative paintings, which is a big focus of yours. Not the only focus, of course, but one of your focus. So let's jump into The Skipper's Wife. Justin, do we have that up on the screen for people to see?
Yes, we do.
Okay. This is a powerful painting. Henk started to introduce it. It's 68 by 98 inches, very large, oil on linen. So Henk,
Yeah.
a little bit more on The Skipper's Wife. What's happening here?
Well, in the painting, you will see a landscape which is really the center of Haarlem, the city of Haarlem, and it has a river running through the city, and it's called the Spaarne River. And it's still there, and actually the landscape in the painting is really quite authentic. It still very much looked like that, including a big windmill, which I thought it'd be great to put in this composition because it makes it so incredibly Dutch, this painting. And there's two things about this series of paintings about Holland. It's one thing about the historic history of these paintings, but they're also highly personal because they're also paintings about my childhood, my youth, the city I grew up in, my parents, my brothers and sisters, what happened to us as children. All of that, living so far away from the other side of the world here in Portland, Oregon, making these paintings also fulfills a kind of sense of perpetual longing from being out of place and recalling my home in a way. So they are, in a curious way, they're about war, but they're also in a funny way nostalgic. I can't really separate my early childhood from being in a war or being hungry or locked up with my families in this little house. So they're also highly personal. I've always really liked painting. I've painted a lot on the water. I really like painting the water and the reflections in it and the mirroring of things and the space. I like the way I have the light falls through stuff. And the ship in the painting is sort of based on, since we come out of the Skipper's family, some of my family, some of my siblings actually have old historic ships. And my sister Hilda has one of these old boats, which is really a period boat. And so I used my sister's ship as the model for the ship in this painting. And I remember that during the war, that ship was actually moored in the Spaarne River. So I remember being inside that ship. I remember the small room. I remember my sister crying. I remember the skipper's wife looking for lice in our head, in our hair. And in fact, I have drawings of that as well. It's this painting doesn't exist by itself. There's a whole satellite that works around it. And so, but rather than setting the scene inside this interior, I thought I will set it out in the landscape, in the space, and put my dad in it, and put me and my sister in it, trying to get out of there. And the skipper's wife says, God, get out with these kids, because they're filthy. And so all of it together makes this story about the isolation, the loneliness of the time, no cars or anything, the sense of threat, the sense of danger in a way, the great beauty of Haarlem also, and the Haarlem River has a long history also of conflict and warfare, all the way going back to the 16th century. So the landscape itself is a historic Dutch landscape. So there's just a great many layers to that painting. But of course, the most important thing is the big figure composition and doing a large figurative narrative painting about history, which is just not being done anymore these days. So it's a great satisfying to do these big figure compositions, but have these figure compositions have some sort of larger meaning than just being decorative or pretty or whatever. So that's
wasn't there a little bit more of a backstory too? I think you were telling me that that the children and families that actually got on the skipper boat did not. They ran into some trouble, right?
I understand what you're telling me. When my dad took us off the ship and said, I won't send you any more away with two strangers. In the meantime, my father worked at the time, for a very famous printing house called Johan Enschede in Haarlem. Very famous. They printed money and post stamps, and just really one of the biggest printing houses in the Netherlands. And my father was a designer there, graphic designer in their design studio. And the leadership of that company had become very concerned about the children of their employees. And so they had made an arrangement with a group of farmers outside of Haarlem, sort of north of Haarlem in North Holland, to bring children there of their employees to be fed, because they were, basically dying. And if the war would have lasted another year, none of us would have survived this. So this printing company had a little truck, which they had a little transporting truck, and they had benches inside of it. And they put in like 13 children to take to these farms. However, my father said, you won't have to go, we'll keep you here, because it's, my sister couldn't handle it and all that. So we did not get to go in the little bus to the countryside. This was shortly after this scene with the skipper's wife. So the little truck went on its way, and they got dispensation by the Nazis that they could actually travel in the country on their way to the farms, together with two chauffeurs and a young woman who was in the resistance for the protection of the kids. So there was 3 adults and 13 children in this little truck driving in the country. In the meantime, there were this massive bombing raids, airplanes coming out, waves of airplanes coming out of England and flying over Germany to either bombing industrial plants or to saturation bomb cities like Dresden and Hamburg and stuff. So there was this waves of planes flying over. I remember those. Big roar in the sky. These planes had escorts, fighter planes, which would keep the Nazi fighter planes at bay. So when these bombers would fly to Germany, drop their bombs, then they would be a lot lighter and they could fly higher and faster on their way back to England, which liberated a number of these Spitfire fighter planes. And so they had permission to fly over occupied Europe and attack Nazi military traffic. And they shot at trains, and they shot anything that moved was being shot at. And so as the little truck went in the country, they were spotted by a Spitfire fighter. The Spitfire dove down on the bus and machine gunned it, made a big loop through the sky, machine gunned it again, and killed like 7 of the children, 1 of the chauffeurs, and the guide, and then flew off. And it just, and the bus was just, in splinters out there and stuff. It just gave an incredible disaster, and it was just by the skin of our teeth that my sister and I had not been with them. So then that narrative came over to here to Portland, and I made 2 paintings about that story as well as a linkage to the skipper's wife. Both those paintings are in the show in Haarlem right now. Mm-hmm. So it's a kind of a whole adventure story in a sense.
Right. Tragic story that you probably were aware of, even as a young.
My parents
young
kept
person.
the story from us.
No, that makes. It's the windmill is so dramatic. Is it really that large?
What?
The windmill.
The window.
Windmill.
Oh, the windmill. Yeah, the windmill is a very big windmill.
Uh huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the
It was there before the war, and then it was torn down, and it's rebuilt now. So it's yeah,
Mhm.
it's a very large windmill.
What's the building behind it? Is that some sort of conservancy
Now
or
the building with the curved roof, with the dome roof, that's the jail. That was actually during the war, where political prisoners were, people were tortured and all that. It's a very heavy duty jail.
Oh my gosh.
Because I remember it, because in the distance there, you see a railroad bridge. And
Yeah.
that railroad bridge goes from the Haarlem Railroad Station directly east to Amsterdam. So there's a railroad line which runs between Haarlem and Amsterdam. It's about a 15-minute railroad ride. And so when you take the train, you go actually really close by that jail. And that jail was always, for me as a young man, was really evocative, because it was not like a simple jail. It was a really serious offenders jail. So, of course, in the war, it wasn't used by the Nazis. It was a terrible place. So I made sure it was in there.
So you were saying that this scene is very much like it is today. Were the buildings rebuilt, or are they original?
Yeah, it's all original. Haarlem wasn't really. I mean, we were occupied, but we were not like parts of Haarlem. A little outskirt of Haarlem, or a little east from here, was a neighborhood. Apparently there was some sort of factories out there, and there was a bombing raid on part of Haarlem, and because the bombing was not as precise as it is now, there was a whole neighborhood which was taken out. But most of Haarlem survived intact.
Mm-hmm. Hank, you talked about this a little bit, but maybe I can ask you to expand a little bit on the sense of how you approach kind of historical narrative paintings. If there's anything else you might want to say beyond what you've already said. I believe you've done historical narrative paintings that are not necessarily from your childhood. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I love historical narrative paintings. You were saying they're kind of out of style, but
yeah, well, I grew up. When I got to art school in the Rijksacademie van Beeld en Kunsten in Amsterdam, all my friends said, now you've studied drawing and painting still lifes and painting portraits and all that. You have to forget all this stuff, and now you have to make modern art and abstract paintings if you want to be really a serious artist. Well, to tell you the truth, I've always really liked to draw. I like to paint in the landscape. I like drawing portraits. I love to draw and all that. And I thought, even really quite early on, I thought it should be possible to make really paintings which are fine drawing, beautiful compositions, great light, beautifully done, and in the meantime being meaningful to the time we live in. May paint a picture of your time. So I've always been doing that. I've been painting the world around me. I've drawn the world around me. I've drawn people around me. I've drawn intimates around me. And I've drawn things which interest me. And I don't care about what anybody else thinks. I'm going to do I've other interests outside of making paintings. I mean, I like natural history. I have a bend towards technology. I like science. I like, living in this world and what is this world all about. And so I like to make paintings which have meaning to me and which I find interesting to paint. And at the same time, I want to make paintings which I think are really fine paintings in my mind. So consequently, I've made these kind of paintings, and I really don't give a shit what anybody else thinks about me, or whether in style, or whether they're conceptually appropriate, or none of that. I could care less. So once you're on this road, doing this kind of stuff, you can't really, I don't really want to step off it either. It's a powerful road, but there's still a lot of things I could probably do better. And so that is sort of also which moves me towards the future and towards new paintings.
Well, as
The
yours,
problem is that
yours,
they're not commercially that they don't really fall very well in the appetite of commercial galleries because they're too big and they're too somber and too whatever. And so it's kind of, I'm shooting myself in the foot economically with these paintings, but at the same time, this is what I do.
well, and then you're very much a storyteller as well in these paintings, which
Yeah,
I
yeah.
appreciate.
Yeah.
Justin, do we have any questions or comments at this point?
Not at this time.
Okay. Anything else you want to say about the skipper's wife, Hank, or we can transition to,
The skipper's wife, that scene actually is one of the kind of more poignant memories I have. And I've over the years made a fair amount of like drawings and sketches and watercolors and stuff. And I always wanted to make it, towards doing a painting. But, these paintings, I have to say, they're expensive. They're an enormous amount of work. I use really expensive linen. I have a big overhead and all that. So it's not that you whip these paintings out either. They have to be done with, you have to be somewhat, you can't just do them. I feel like creating and stuff. You have to be kind of careful with them because of the, considerable expense associated with making one of these paintings. So,
right.
But I had it sort of in my plans to do this painting for a long time. And so it's sort of not like a spontaneous painting, but then when I made these paintings about this attack on that airplane, of course, then this painting was really missing out of that narrative. And so.
And what year did you complete that? Do you recall?
This particular piece?
Yeah.
I don't know the date of it. I think it's, well, the photo was taken in February 19. So there is probably painted at the end of last year.
Okay. That's nice to know. Very recent. Okay, so let's transition from the World War II era to modern day with your I understand it's completed painting called Court, which is of the U.S. Federal Courthouse in downtown Portland, which has had so much attention with the protests of late. And then the second painting is called New World Order, which is also related to the courthouse. Oh, I'm sorry, just New World. They're both 60 by 72, oil on linen. Let's start with Court. Justin, do you have that up on the screen for people to see? Okay. So talk us through this painting, Hank.
Just a minute. I'm trying to find it on my iPad here. It shouldn't be that far. There it is. Okay, I got it. Well, oh, shit. Just a second. Okay. Well, apparently, we're living now, it seems to me, in a whole new era. I mean, this country has been in some sort of internal conflict for a long time, but what has been happening right now, especially in Portland, has been extremely, to me and to most people around me, just extremely shocking and disturbing. I have painted over the year, years ago, I proposed to do to the city of Portland to do a program, which is we call here the Visual Chronicle, which is to chronicle the changing urban environment. And it's based on a program they have in Amsterdam called the Topographische Atlas, the Topographic Atlas, which commissions people yearly to make drawings of the city Amsterdam. And I've been doing that for years, and these atlases go back actually to the 15th century. And they commission artists every year about how the city of Amsterdam is actually changing and developing through time. So it's kind of the citizen artist reflecting on the living environment of one of these big cities. And so since Portland had been, changing a great deal over the years and things being torn down and culture, changing and all that, I proposed to do a program like that here in Portland. And so there's a topographic atlas program here in Portland. And I thought I should put my money where my mouth is. And so I've been sort of also documenting occasionally, events where there's a dramatic change in the urban environment. And I've even in 2001, I went to New York and studied the ruins of the World Trade Center and did a big 7 by 12 foot canvas of these ruins in the city of New York. So when all this stuff all of a sudden came down to Portland, out of all places, a very nice liberal city, peaceful, wonderful, and suddenly this extreme violence developed in this very, very small area on 3rd Avenue. I thought, involving only 2 buildings, I thought I'm gonna make some paintings of these buildings and reflecting sort of, in a sense, the stain on the justice and the courts as it has been developing here. And so I made one painting, a large painting of the Justice Center. And then I made another painting of the big courthouse, which was a federal courthouse, which was then heavily defended by these federal troops here, which attacked the citizens of Portland. And so that's sort of what this painting was. So Jacob, my son, and I went down and attended a number of these demonstrations, got out of there before, tear gas started spewing and bullets flying, because I had to be careful with my eyes. But at the same time, I just documented the scene there, and then I made a couple of, fairly substantial paintings of it. So they're kind of also basically history paintings, contemporary history about conflict and war, just as much as these paintings out of Holland are also about, kind of a form of fascism and how it affects the people around them. So in that sense, they're contemporary, they're set in the United States, but they're not that dissimilar from these paintings during the Second World War.
And so this scene is happening at night. The federal agents are coming in. There's a fence all around the courthouse,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
And the protesters are running away on the left corner. And the light is very striking. Is that the yellow in the building and
Yeah,
in the
well, we went down there sort of around sunset.
sky?
And so you get this really quite, it was a really beautiful time of day, the way the light falls through the city and the western light, and it lights up sort of through buildings in the distance. And so it has this sort of twilight, sort of evening light in it. And oftentimes in these paintings, what I've done to indicate a sense of fires and conflict and war and stuff, I make the distant sky somewhat ambiguous. Is it a sunset or is it a fire? And because of the periods that this things happened, there were simultaneously these fast fires through the American West. And in the painting called New World, I actually painted the sky blood red in it as the photographs appeared of the skies of this immense forest fires here in Oregon. So in a sense, even I folded the fires and the period of conflict and climate change all together in these somewhat symbolic paintings about, basically, essentially the very disturbing times you're living. So they're kind of, part of the whole thread of paintings I've been working on over the years.
Mhm.
And again, it allowed for a great composition, and I, put these figures in it to indicate also scale, and so it's just it's a well-researched paintings. But I stain these paintings as if they were, I actually disturb these buildings themselves as if they were a stain on the justice or on right or on the courts. Or so I just sort of said in fact, the painting I did of the Justice Center actually titled Stain.
Mhm.
And so the buildings themselves have been kind of degraded in a way.
Right. And there's,
But it gives
You-
also, it makes for texture, it gives a great expressionist thing. But after all, they're not illustrations, they're not reality, it's the painted world. It's the imagined world. It's not like the real world. So the painted world is different from taking a photograph.
and you've cut off the top of the Justice Center building. Was that sort of intentional, or just from a
What?
composition standpoint that you?
Well, yeah, that building, that is, if I had to include that whole building, I had to make a different kind of painting. So I had that tower sort of, and it's better in terms of compositions, it's better to cut something off altogether and let it shoot out of the painting than sort of cramp it in there.
Right.
You cramp it in there, it doesn't work. It's better. So I have the whole foreground building in, and the other building sort of rises beyond it, and it may rise up to the moon for all we know.
And a real strong sense of darkness on the right side of the painting, which maybe is implying.
Yeah, I just ran these skeins of paint over it, so it's all like things that slid down these walls and stuff. So, right. But it gives kind of, it gives a kind of, it sort of focuses on these characters in the foreground. And I've been following these kids who do these streamers, and these kids are right in the middle of the action, and I put the streamer on my iPad, and sometimes I sit in the middle of the night and being right in that, and there's really incredible scenes happening right on my iPad as it is happening. I take with the cell phone, take pictures of the iPad, and then make prints of them. So I have actually quite authentic prints of moments of being right in it.
Mm-hmm. Then let's transition a little bit to, like you mentioned, a related painting, New World. Justin, do we have that on the screen?
Yes, I do, Tom.
Okay, thank you, Justin. And so this is a painting in progress, right?
Yeah.
Hank, you're about 2/3 of the way through this painting.
Yeah.
And it's
Find it.
60 by 72, same size as
Same
the
size.
other
I
painting.
just bought a group of canvases. So it's kind of like a series. So this again is the foot of the Hatfield Court building. There is a big corridor underneath it with a colonnade of these big columns, and there's sort of a section of it. And then to the right, you see the front of the Justice Center also. And then beyond that are other kind of big federal buildings and stuff. So you sort of look alongside of it. This, I initially was gonna put figures in it, but I think I'm gonna make this painting more suggestive of that, just be pure raw architecture. And these buildings were completely covered in graffitis. And I'm not gonna paint all the graffitis in it either, but I'm suggesting that these things have been disturbed and violated in a sense. And so there's The street is all going to be textured. There's going to be a rubble on it. And I'm going to have to work a little bit through the details of these buildings. So there's certain areas which could be, you know, the overhang could be developed a little bit more and stuff. So, but essentially this painting will stay. Maybe it'll get darker here and there a little. But again, it sort of suggests of the extremity about how elegant, beautiful Portland, at least part of it, have changed into this really harsh, sort of disturbing world. You know, all these buildings downtown are all boarded up and graffiti. It's just completely, the city within, just in a really short time, like within a few months, has changed from a really elegant, beautiful city to this really kind of rundown, depressed place with, you know, sidewalks full of homeless people, and just a really incredible starkness and dreariness has sort of fallen over this really beautiful city. So, and I lived here a long time, so it's also identify with it. And so I just decided to make a body work sort of reflecting on it in the assumption that over time, things will change. The ship will right, and maybe we'll get our city back to what it was. But at the same time, there's this period of time in 2020 when Portland was like this, and this happened in the era of Trump. So it's a Trumpism itself has affected in our living world. So maybe not as much in Newport, but here definitely.
Yeah, I really appreciate the starkness of the New World painting, and it almost feels to me a little bit like old school Portland. Like when I first saw it, it reminded me of like the Lovejoy, underneath the old Lovejoy ramp, and those sorts of colonnades. And it is really interesting that you don't have any figures involved. And
no, I'm going to do probably do more paintings which have no figure, probably more evocative, so the viewer themselves can fill in the story of it rather than me telling the story, implying the story, sort of the viewer can address it, the painting themselves more. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to make paintings simpler. Also in the landscape paintings I did this last week, that were also simpler and starker in a way. I sent an image of this painting to my brother Pander in Amsterdam, whom I'm really good friends with. And he sent this painting. He said, "Hey Pander, I'm working on this painting in Dutch." He sent me back one word. He sent Berlin. And I said, and then I wrote a text in America, I said, "Berlin, what do you mean with that?" And he said, "Well, I have a book which was done by a Dutch photographer of the way Berlin looked right after the war. And this painting reminds me of this Dutch photographer who made his paintings of Berlin when the war was over, although it's set in contemporary America." So that was sort of the narrative I had with my brother about it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think you're going to be doing more paintings related to the area around the Justice Center and you know, that related activity? Or
well, I have to sort of think about it. I'm also, you know, I'm in the process of a fundraiser to paint a formal portrait of like Representative Earl Blumenauer for Portland State, to do a big painting for that, and that'll be set in Portland also, probably on the new bridge out there. So, you know, also kind of thinking about, you know, I have to also make a living, so I have to think a little bit about what's coming up. So I'm kind of focused on that at the moment. I want to get this painting done, and I still have some large pieces of watercolor left, so I may start working on some watercolor studies. I also recently did a number of paintings about the coronavirus experience as well. And I went two ways. My assistant lives downstairs here, and she has been in self-quarantine for like, you know, months here all by herself. And so I set up her room, part of her room in my studio, and painted her surrounded by her books and her things she likes a lot and stuff, sitting on her bed with her iPad, being alone in that world. So I did a painting of that. And then I have a book I had years ago about the Black Death, which about 10 years ago, and it's a book which described what happened in 1347 to like 1350 something, about how the plague washed over the whole world and actually literally killed half the population. And it's a detailed book about the description about what happened then and there. And I thought this would be kind of a great theme to paint a painting of like that time as a comment on now in a way. So I'd be making a number of works set in 1347 in like the Crimea and in the Black Sea and these kind of worlds, all these galleys with these, infected people in there, and following the trade routes and then infecting the whole world. Like right now, the coronavirus is following also the trade routes with airplanes and dispersing this virus all over the world as well. So there's a kind of similarity between what happened then and what happens now, except maybe we can be thankful that we breathe this thing in and there's actually a chance that we may actually survive it. But at the time, basically, millions and millions of people died. And it was absolutely indescribable, these scenes. And then now we sort of know what it is. Then they had no idea where it came from. So they added all these imaginations. Ultimately, they decided it was the Jews who did it. So you got incredible massacres and pogroms and all that. Absolutely unbelievable what happened there in the Middle Ages. So I've been making kind of some paintings and watercolors and stuff sort of around that theme as well, because it's set so remote and it's so basically like science fiction. So I'm kind of thinking about becoming less literal and making more works just sheerly of the imagination rather than painting a particular building, is to sort of more free myself a little bit from the actual here and now towards a more extended kind of point of view about it. So if I can.
Well, Hank, you mentioned being in your studio, and it was a real treat for me to visit your studio a couple years ago before you had your show of watercolors here at the Newport Visual Arts Center, which we completely enjoyed. Justin, can we have a photo of Hank in a studio? Can you put that up?
Okay, a second.
Was that a recent photo, Hank, or did?
That's pretty recent. You can, in fact, you can see in the background the court painting as I was working on it at the time. And then there's a view of Amsterdam, which I was working on it at the same time as well. So it's really it's a quite recent photo.
I don't have that. I don't have the photo of you in your studio in front of me, but you create a lot of still lifes in your studio.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. Still lifes, portraits. Yeah, it's a busy studio, actually.
Yeah, it's wonderful. All right. Justin, any other questions or comments?
Very speechless.
No questions came in.
Okay, that's all right. Well, Hank, thank you again for being with us today. This conversation can be rebroadcast on YouTube Live. And in fact, we tend to get as many views, if not more, on the rebroadcast. I want to thank you for your support for the Newport Visual Arts Center and your just dynamic, creative spirit. Our next talk will be next Sunday. It will be Rick Bartow in Context. It will be a panel discussion with members of the Rick Bartow estate They will talk both about his work in the context of contemporary Native American paintings, but also their work to keep his legacy alive. That should be a very interesting discussion as well. So again, this is Tom Webb talking with Henk Pander. Thank you, Justin, for being our IT person. Unless, Henk, you have anything else to say, I think we'll wrap it up.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Have a great Sunday.
Yep, thanks.
Yep.